We begin with those allegations of fraud at Minnesota child care centers. Federal officials say they're freezing payments across the state while they investigate the claims. The move comes after a YouTuber posted videos alleging empty daycare centers receiving taxpayer money. The House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is getting ready to hold hearings. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the state's Attorney General Keith Ellison have been invited to testify in February. CBS News conducted its own analysis of nearly a dozen daycare centers mentioned by Shirley. CBS News Minnesota's Jonah Kaplan adds context.
This is going to have a wide-ranging impact. There are more than 1,100 child care centers here in Minnesota that rely on some form of government funding to help keep the lights on and the doors open, and many parents rely on it. But still, HHS saying that this freeze is necessary, especially to investigate the fraud. And they're crediting that video from YouTube influencer Nick Shirley that HHS and federal officials say shows that rampant fraud in Minnesota.
Intrepid journalists have made shocking and credible allegations of extensive fraud in Minnesota's child care programs.
The widely circulated video from YouTube influencer Nick Shirley purportedly showed empty daycare centers in Minnesota that received millions in federal funds. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is now freezing payments to all child care centers in the state while they investigate those claims. HHS leaders outlining new steps to combat fraud, saying all payments across the country handled by the Administration for Children and Families will require a justification and a receipt or photo evidence before we send money to a state. They also want Governor Tim Walz to conduct a comprehensive audit of the state's child care centers. HHS is launching a fraud reporting system hotline, too.
Any dollar stolen by fraudsters is stolen from those children.
But several of those daycare centers featured in Shirley's video are pushing back against those fraud claims.
This door is locked.
Like ABC Learning, which shared with us security camera footage showing parents dropping off children on the same day Shirley visited. In this video, you can see Shirley arriving at the center time-stamped around noon. Within the hour, this woman arrives at the door with a stroller. A few hours later, another larger family goes inside. Just yesterday, CBS Minnesota visited that same licensed facility where we found about a dozen kids. The daycare's owner says this latest move is political.
What did I do? I'm just a typical human being who wants to live and do the right thing. I have kids to feed.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in a statement defending his administration's record and also pushing back and pointing to President Trump in particular about this freeze and the federal government's targeting of Minnesota, saying in this statement, "We've spent years cracking down on fraudsters. It's a serious issue, but this has been his plan all along. He's politicizing the issue to defund programs that help Minnesota." CBS News and CBS News Minnesota has also visited many of the daycare sites that were cited and mentioned in that Nick Shirley video. We've seen and heard from neighbors as well that kids were showing up there, and we're also hearing again from people pushing back on those claims. HHS, meanwhile, has not provided any update on what's going to happen, especially next week as parents come back to work and people rely on these daycare centers as life resumes coming up in 2026. Jonah Kaplan, CBS News, Minneapolis.
Jonah, thank you. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. So, Aaron, the White House says these fraud allegations are a top priority for the administration. What are you hearing?
Lindsay, good to be with you. It seems to be also a top priority for today for President Trump, as he's posted about Minnesota already 3 times on Truth Social. In his latest post, he claims that 90% of fraud is caused by Somalians who come into the U.S. illegally and that they should be sent, quote, back from where they came. It's worth noting that a majority of Somali Americans who have been charged in fraud cases so far in Minnesota are U.S. citizens and represent less than 1% of Minnesota's Somali diaspora of about 80,000. But that has not stopped President Trump and the White House's constant rhetoric and blame of Democratic Governor Tim Walz, as you just heard. Walz, of course, ran against President Trump on the Democratic ticket in 2024. And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said he did not do enough to stop the fraud as governor. Take a listen to her here.
People will be in handcuffs as a result of the fraud that Governor Walz has allowed to occur for many, many years. The Department of Homeland Security is conducting door-to-door investigations on the ground at potential fraud sites, and they are also, of course, conducting continued deportations of illegal aliens in Minnesota's communities. We're also not afraid to use denaturalization.
Yeah, Levitt also added that the Department of State is considering and looking at denaturalization or taking away the U.S. citizenship of some of those Somali Americans in Minnesota. And she added that Minnesota could just be the first Democrat-ran state to be looked at and investigated in this way for fraud in a closer kind of magnifying glass from the federal government, adding that California and New York have, quote, massive fraud and could be next.
I also want to ask you about the president vetoing a pair of bipartisan bills this week. What do we know, and how rare is it for the president to exercise this power?
Yeah, the first veto is of a bill to complete a water pipeline in southeastern Colorado, and that would have an impact on Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, the Republican in the House who broke with President Trump by supporting the release of further Epstein files. And she said that this veto is, quote, political retaliation. In a letter to Congress explaining his veto, President Trump said he thought that federal taxpayers should not pick up more of the bill when it comes to funding this pipeline. And he also criticized Colorado for its level of emigration, those leaving the state, and the persecution of Tina Peters, a county clerk in Colorado convicted on election interference charges. In terms of the frequency of vetoes, it is rare. These are the first two vetoes of his second term. During his first term, he only vetoed 10 bills. In comparison, President Biden vetoed 13 bills while he was in the White House. So this is especially rare for a president when his own political party is in power in Congress.
Aaron, thank you.